Promote a culture of inclusion, supercharge your communication, and unleash the full potential of your teams and leaders with the Inclusive Handbook collection from the Diversity Movement. As part of the collection, I wrote the Inclusive Leadership Handbook with Kurt Merriweather to empower leaders with tools needed to cultivate a culture that fosters creativity, innovation, and employee engagement. Through strategies, exercises, and self-reflection, leaders at all levels can enhance their effectiveness. Learn more at thediversitymovement.com/store. Use code HOL at checkout for 25% of your first order.
Meaningful work to me, as you said, goes beyond employee engagement. It's a different level. It's a new way of thinking that I think is important. The way I see it as almost structure. The foundational pieces of meaningful work, to me, have to begin with psychological safety and inclusive leadership. So you have as the undergirding of everything, psychological safety, inclusive leadership. And then above that, or almost derived from that environment and that way of your culture operating, I see it breaking down into 3 points: value, fairness, and craft.
Welcome to High Octane Leadership with Donald Thompson. This season, we're diving deeper with more solo episodes, where I'll share the experiences that have led to recognition by EY, Forbes, Fast Company, and others. Not as a boast, but as milestones on my entrepreneurial path. From growing multi-million-dollar firms to successful business exits and building high-performance teams with a global perspective. I'll reveal the insights and strategies from my journey and share them with you so that we can win together. Alongside these solo episodes, we'll have industry visionaries and thought leaders, and we'll explore effective leadership. Ready to empower your leadership journey with real success stories? Let's embark on this transformational journey together. Welcome to another episode of High Octane Leadership. Today we're going to talk about a topic that I really want to unpack with two great friends of mine, two savants in content communication, Jackie Ferguson and Bob Batchelor. And the topic we're going to talk about today is meaningful work. We talk a lot about psychological safety, employee engagement, how to build high-performing teams. But as I've talked with my two partners over the last year, as we've talked about employee engagement, as we've talked about psychological safety, one of the things that we've come to really define, but we want to unpack today, is the concept of meaningful work. We want to try to figure out and better understand and share with you as an audience that difference between people that are engaged and productive and people that are bringing their full best self to their work, to their project, to their team every single day. And as we've unpacked our careers and thought about what makes us move, what gives us that extra energy boost, it is not only the people we're working with, but it is also the meaning that we apply to the work we're doing and how that work shows up in the world. And I couldn't be more pleased to have two of my great friends and business partners, Jackie Ferguson and Bob Batchelor, with me today. And so thanks for both of you to spend time and unpacking this great topic.
We're all friends here.
Thanks, Don. Happy to be here.
One of the things that I'd like to do before we really dive in is, and Bob, will start with you, and then Jackie, you can finish up. Give me your definition to build a foundation for our audience on what is meaningful work and what are some of the key elements to it. How you think about meaningful work, define it, but then the pillars that underpin it from your perspective, your experience. And Bob, I'll give the mic to you first, and then Jackie, I'll let you dive in.
Remember, you gave me all the time I want to talk, so I might just take that. This podcast is pretty much over now, so no, thanks, Dawn, for having me on, and I love spending time with Jackie anytime that I get because she's so damn smart, so it's great to be here, and I appreciate it. Meaningful work to me, as you said, goes beyond employee engagement. It's a different level. It's a new way of thinking that I think is important. The way I see it as almost structure, the foundational pieces of meaningful work, to me, have to begin with psychological safety and inclusive leadership. So you have as the undergirding of everything, psychological safety, inclusive leadership. And then above that, or almost derived from that environment and that way of your culture operating, I see it breaking down into 3 points: value, fairness, and craft. And I'm not exactly sure if craft is the right word, but maybe it'll make more sense in a second when I explain it. Value is that a person feels, an employee feels, that there is either customer-based or societal value in the work. Regardless of the work, that it has importance, it has meaning. If you work at a bank, you're holding somebody's assets, and that's probably the most important thing to them from a personal and professional perspective. But the meaningful work has to convey value. The fairness piece is that decisions and processes and the culture is based on transparency and fairness. And I think that it's interesting when you look at pay. People somehow figure out what others make. They have an idea, who knows. But we often in the world don't talk about pay fairness. And I know that equity is so important to the three of us. Pay fairness needs to be a part of that fairness look. And then craft, I see craft as, how do you help an employee chart their path to success? So craft could be that you give somebody who thrives on success stretch projects, or you give a younger employee opportunities to educate themselves beyond the day, that kind of thing. And so, or promotion, even promoting somebody when they deserve it. And through that process, I think that's part of the craft. When you take these pieces together, you create an environment and a culture built on trust. And that seems to me, if I just boiled it all down to one word, trust is the difference between employee engagement and meaningful work. Because what we know from the statistics is that people do not trust their employees, thus they are not engaged. And so understanding that this is super hard work, and though we might have at one point labeled this all soft, this is the hardest work that a business leader can do. Changing hearts and minds, that's tough. But I think if you take these different pillars that I've outlined for meaningful work, roll them up into something, it's creating a truly trusting culture that you could put benchmarks and put incentives, financial incentives behind. You could put KPIs behind. So I think all this makes real business sense if an organization and leader is willing to put your money where your mouth is, put your money where your culture is, and can you build that out? But it's super difficult work, and that's why I think the topic is really, really important to discuss. So that's me. Now I'll turn the microphone over to our much smarter colleague, Jackie, to give us the actual, what meaningful work is all about.
Well, Bob, every time I meet with you and Don, I always have notes. So just because I'm on a podcast, it's no different. I'm sitting here scribbling my notes out because you all always say smart things that I want to keep. So thank you for that. From my perspective, meaningful work is about purpose, connection, and contribution. So the sense that what you do matters and aligns with the company goals and aligns with what makes you feel fulfilled as an individual. But it's also a shared responsibility from my perspective. So leaders need to create the environment where people feel valued and connected to that larger mission. But employees also have a role in choosing where they work, who they work for, and ensuring that they're speaking up to say what they enjoy working on, what they're excited about working on, when they want those stretch projects as well. So I think when we think about culture in general, a lot of people talk about the employer's responsibility, but there's an employee responsibility as well. Also, I think it's important to remember that meaningful work is dynamic. So it evolves with us across the whole employee life cycle. So early in a career, people prioritize growth and learning. Mid-career, it may shift more towards impact and recognition. And then later, legacy and contribution take center stage. It also evolves with what's happening in that employee's life. So when they're young parents, they need one thing. When they're taking care of their parents, they need another thing, when they've got that window of time where they can focus on work or they've got outside responsibilities, all of that contributes to what meaningful work means. And that changes, again, with the employee life cycle. I also think that meaning isn't just about prestige roles, right? Every job has impact, and it's the leader's responsibility to connect the dots so that every employee sees the value in what they do. So that requires a level of authenticity, right? Employees see through those performative mission statements pretty quickly. And another driver is agency. So when people have the autonomy and a voice in how they do their work, I think their sense of purpose deepens. And then finally, I would say the business case shows that meaningful work is important. So Gallup research shows employees who find their work meaningful are 5 times more engaged and far more loyal. And the McKinsey found that they're 1.4 times more satisfied and 3 times more likely to stay. So meaning translates directly into productivity, into creativity, into resilience, and it protects against burnout as well.
So you both said a lot in a short period of time. And so one, I'm going to take the biggest takeaways from each. And so Bob, from listening to you, I want to unpack a little bit on that bridge of trust between employee engagement and meaningful work, and get to now, how do we build that as leaders? How do we monitor that, right? So I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Like, all of it was good, but I'm going to pick the one thing for now that just jumped off the page at me. And then Jackie, for your component, and I'm glad that I set it up for you all to lay the foundation, because you both said similar things, but different perspective to the goal, which is powerful. So we'll talk about trust. Then we're going to talk about the employee life cycle, because Jackie, I think that is really critical in learning how to lead. If we don't understand someone's relationship with work, then we don't know how to lead them. And I really, as a business leader, as a CEO, as a board member, as an investor, it took me longer than I want to admit to understand how critical that is to how someone operates on a day-to-day basis, right? If you've got kids that are getting ready to go to college and it is more immediate, it's 3-4 years away, money is how you are recognized, because that money allows you to put dollars into that college fund that is more immediate, because now your kids are in high school and you're panicking a little bit. And to your point of, when someone has a young family, flexibility in time is the critical thing, because you got activities, you got different things, you're sharing the burden. And so I want to unpack that, because that is really important to the meaning of work, because a lot of times we think it's the job description, the mission of the firm, and all these things are important. But if they don't connect to how I live my life, then I'm not going to be as committed to those things. And I think that managers could use some thoughts there. So Bob, I'm going to let you jump off, talk to us, and then Jackie will jump in on this. But the topic here is, how do we build, maintain, grow trust so that we can make that leap from employee engagement to meaningful work? And to me, when you have people operating in meaningful work, now you're talking about loyalty, right? And I'll give an example of a difference to me. It's a competitive marketplace. AI is eliminating some of the entry-level roles in many businesses, which means your high performers are going to be even more valuable. You're going to have less people in the enterprise. And so the people you are leading are going to be doing more impactful things. I was talking to Greg Boone, the CEO of Walk West, the other day. AI is to do the routine so that your team can do the remarkable. And so if you've got people working on your highest value things, now as a leader, you've got to figure out how to build that trust and loyalty for the long term. And so I'd be interested in how you all think that plays out, right, in the real world, and how do we build trust, maintain trust throughout this high octane environment we're all working in.
Thanks, Don. And I appreciate just the candor with which you both speak, because as you were explaining, like, kind of the high points of what we said, I'm still unpacking and rolling through my brain my leadership of the marketing and communications team at Workplace Options. And so even though I've transitioned to being a professor, now teaching at Coastal Carolina University, I am replaying my leadership style. And so my focus, my natural human being focus is on the employee. But my focus over the last several years has been at the upper level leading teams. And I never really thought about it like that until you started piecing it apart. Now that I'm teaching people about to enter the workforce, I'm transitioning to a new mental model for myself. So I just appreciate the atmosphere and the candor, because I think the easiest thing is to come in and just everything's rainbows and butterflies, but let's actually parse it out. And Jackie obviously gives the smartest answer on the planet because she's an empathetic, inclusive leader and has that perspective and is very comfortable in that. I'm probably a more uncomfortable leader than she is in many respects. So I'm still hashing it all out. So how does somebody make, or how does a leadership team make the bridge between meaningful work and trust? If I believe what I outlined, then it begins with psychological safety and inclusive leadership. Psychological safety, as we all know, is incredibly difficult to actually do in the real world. I was looking at the Workplace Options psychological safety study because I always return to it because it's such a great data set. And what the psychological safety study does, for listeners who are unfamiliar, is it looks at 18 countries and breaks down the top 3 reasons that an employee feels unsafe or has challenges in the workplace. And it's built on actual clinician conversation with real employees. So it's not survey data. It's actually what's happening on those phone calls. So when I look at a place, look at India and all the challenges the Indian workforce has, the number one challenge identified in the psychological safety study is conflict with manager. Well, that's central to a workplace that does not have psychological safety, and probably the majority of the leadership, from probably middle management on, are not operating an inclusive leadership style. And so some of these pieces, extremely fundamental. When you look at France, the number one concern is lack of professional development. Again, that's directly opposed to this idea that I talk about with the secondary level of meaningful work is fairness and craft. And so maybe it's the impact of the psychological safety study, since my team was able to put this out over 2 years and we were so enmeshed in it and ran seminars and talked about this with people all over the world. But it's where I return to get the real data about what the challenges are, fully understanding that building out a psychological safe workplace is not easy because you need to be able to speak truth to power. And we don't live in a society in which we feel free to speak truth to power. And so how do you then talk to leaders, or leaders talk to their people in a way that's psychologically safe when your paycheck's on the line? So it's very challenging. What I would say is, in connecting meaningful work to trust, is that it has to be sponsored by the C-suite. It needs to be sponsored by the CEO. It needs to be the CEO. That person needs to be actively engaged. And I think, like all good implementation, it needs to be done in small bites. You can't gobble up culture change. Culture change takes a long time. It's easy to break culture. You can do that quickly. But you can't turn around a culture. You can't take a good culture and make it great quickly. So it's small steps, small incremental steps. And it's a recognition by leaders and leadership teams that this isn't the weak side of leadership. This is actually now flipped. It's the most important thing that you can do. It's the most important impact that you can have on your business and the business's future. Because we pretend that we're strategic thinkers and we all have 5 and 10-year plans, when most people, most families are 1 paycheck or 2 paychecks away from like destitute status. So we are not strategic thinkers, and we naturally don't like speaking truth to power for the most part. It's a rare trait to have somebody who's brave enough either to speak up the ladder or even speak down the ladder without it seeming command and control. So small steps, incremental steps, sponsored at the top, get the manager level in your company enthused and engaged, incentivize them. That may be the biggest thing you could do.
So, Bob, I'm going to jump in here, and Jackie, I'm going to ask Bob a question, and then I'm going to turn the mic to you for a little bit. Bob, when we first started working together, and so let me paint a picture here, right? When we first started partnering with Bob at the diversity movement, and Bob was instrumental in my book and several books in the past, and really now my creative partner, but that's present. When we started, you already were a PhD. You already were a globally famous author. You already had 15 books under the belt. You already had been a chief communications strategist with Bank of America and other billion-dollar companies. You already had been a professor at UCS. So your resume before we met was already a career full of wins. And yet and still, it took you and I many months for you to believe that I wanted your full feedback, that I wanted you to push back on my ideas. And so what I want to ask you now to kind of be open, vulnerable, and even if it affects my leadership or my ego in this moment, I want you to be truthful. What did I do right and wrong from your perspective coming in to build that trust? And then knowing what you know now, what should you have done as a team member and an employee different or better? How did you learn from that experience? Because it was still the reason I give the backdrop of all of your accolades. It still took you time to develop that trust and confidence, to be open, to take advantage of the psychological safety that was there. That means even the best trained leader is still going to meet with resistance of people accepting it. So I'd love for you to unpack that a little bit. And then Jackie, you saw that evolve. And so I want you to jump in and comment and all the things.
I think about that a lot, actually. And I thought about that a lot when I was leading my team. And so what were the challenges? We're all Gen Xers. We're of a certain age. I think that makes us super wise and super talented. But it also, there's baggage. And so I would say from my perspective, especially in marketing and communications and being a public relations practitioner, it's pounded into your mind that you're like the electricity heating or lighting up the building or the HVAC system. You're just a cost center. And so you spend your career as a communicator trying to prove your worth, but also looking over your shoulder. And so early in my time with the diversity movement, Jackie and I were working very closely. And so we vibed from the day one. And so my number one concern was to make sure that my relationship with Jackie was hand in glove. My baggage that I carried, particularly, it's strange because it's different when you're a consultant. When I was a prof at University of South Florida and some other places, I would meet with CEOs regularly because when they're asking you for help, you have a certain amount of power. And so I could talk freely, openly, you pay me or not, I don't even care. Like at that point, like I'm doing this because I'm interested in the problem or challenge the company is facing, the CEO is facing. Once you're somebody's employee, the power structure shifts. And when I had been an employee earlier in my career, the CEO was the person up on the top of the pedestal. Everybody else was Joe, Steve, Janice, whatever, but the CEO was Mr. or Mrs. It was a different level. And so even though I saw you frequently and we talked, we didn't have the kind of personal relationship that would develop over time that then was kind of the blossom of the trust. So what I should have done is said, hey, Don, let's go get lunch. Let's spend some time together. And I should have also looked ahead and tried to map out the future and then brought that to you and said, here's what I'm seeing. Where do you agree? Where do you disagree? Whereas from my past, I was probably a little hesitant to do that because I was used to executives. If you brought them that kind of perspective, played devil's advocate or whatever, they'd pick up on the negatives and then assume that you don't want to be put in the foul ball category. And so there's always that concern in a power structure. How is the other person perceiving me? So it was easier for me, particularly in the earliest days at the diversity movement, to align with Jackie and make sure she and I were on the same page when I should have been spending more time engaging with you.
Jackie, I'd love your thoughts so much on the Bob and DT dynamic, but on that same construct of what is the employee's responsibility when there is that opening from leadership for psychological safety? There is that desire for feedback, being more candid and collaborative, to walk in that space, and what you've seen in leading teams and consulting, and would love that perspective from you as well.
One of the things that I would say first is agreeing with Bob. When Bob talks about leadership, he always integrates self-awareness. And I think that one of the things that leaders think about themselves is that they are an open leader, and they invite conversation and they invite conflict, and really they don't. So that's why Bob felt the way he did, because that's his experience. That's many of our experience. So a leader that really wants that creative discourse is rare. And that's why employees respond the way they do, because they know that, they feel that, and they don't trust it until they have time. Where I think an employee can participate in finding that out with that specific leader is to push a little bit at a time. I don't think they have to say, Don, I know you had this idea. I don't think we should do it. I think it's terrible. I think it's sending us in the wrong direction. That takes time. But to say, Don, have you thought about this scenario? Or could we think about it like this? And then see what your response is to that. If it's positive, now you can push a little more and a little more. So I think that's how an employee can determine if that leader is really open to hearing best thoughts versus the thoughts that align with what they think. But I think that leaders also need to have real self-awareness, because as we also know, many leaders are put in positions based on relationships or tenure that they may not fully be qualified for. The reason why you invite that conversation is because you're confident as a leader in your capabilities. Not everyone is. They think they are, but they're not.
One of the things that you described, and I'll push back a little bit, is that leaders think they want to create an environment, but they really don't. And the part I'll push back a little bit as I talk to leaders is I think it's not they don't want to. I think it's they don't know how. I think that now, certainly there are leaders that don't want to, but a lot of the leaders that I'm talking with are struggling with the how, because what is introduced is the pressure and the time pressure and the revenue pressure that they're under, that is a competing demand often to the culture they want to create, because leaders are compensated by very measurable figures and not always equally or even substantially weighted for the culture they create. So there's a conflict often at the board level and then the C-suite level of how we design compensation for leaders. But then more importantly, to your point, Jackie, that I completely agree, leaders are actually elevated often for their technical acumen in a certain industry. If you're in retail, they were a great retail person that had great ideas. If they're in marketing, they were ad master. They're promoted a lot of times based on certain excellence and skill set, but they've actually not demonstrated the people leadership capabilities that are required in this time and that employees expect. And so my thing on meaningful work, to bring it back to the core topic, is I think the leader's responsibility is to pull from the team on such a consistent basis that it becomes a practice habit that, you know, if you're going to go in a meeting with me, I'm going to ask your opinion. I'm going to pull from others in the room. I'm going to wait till the end to make a statement of what I think or believe, because leaders change the flow of the entire room if they make a statement of how they feel about something. Then the rest of the room starts to just coalesce around what the leader thought, versus the leader pulling and saying, Julie, tell me what you think about this challenge and how do we attack it? James, I know you've got some good ideas in marketing. How do you think we ought to package that? And leaders often, and you all taught me this, you have to slow down and have a more full conversation. And most leaders want to operate in sound bites. And most people don't operate that way, and they need a little bit more time to unpack their thinking. And so my thing as a leader that I've learned the most about creating meaningful work, meaningful conversations, is I have to slow down the conversation to speed up what I learn. And that took a lot of time for me to believe that that was the best, highest use of my time, to be really direct and transparent. But now that I do, I try to give a lot more space. But I wanted to continue. Jackie, you want to add to that?
Well, Don, your disagreement with me actually made my point. The reason why is because leaders want to do this, but they really do this. And the experience that employees have is with what they really do, not with what they want to do. They think they're doing this, they want to do this, but they don't make the time, but they don't know how to approach it. The employee's experience is with what they actually do, not with what their intention is.
Audience, ladies and gentlemen, that would be one of the top 10 smoothest checkmates that I've experienced in my working career. And I will say, well done, madam. Point well taken. Go ahead, Bob.
No, I was going to say, and Don, you're probably tired of hearing me say this, but I keep saying it because I think people need to hear it. And it underlines a lot of the things that you and I have been writing lately, and the things that we'll continue to write about. Is there is a power structure in every relationship in your personal and professional life, whether you recognize it or not. You may want to ignore it, but it's there. There is a power relationship. And I've been in situations where I've talked with teams, and on my one-on-one conversations with teammates who are quote unquote lower on the ladder, they're intelligent, they're saying great things, they understand the culture. And then you get in a room where there are bosses or the boss's boss in the room, and they're Zippo. They say nothing. And you have to wonder, or you don't have to wonder, you see it right in front of you, like the disconnect here is that people are scared for some reason. Now, it could be 65% the employee, 35% the leader, it could be vice versa. But that recognizing that power is there is, I would say, a first step toward thwarting it or overcoming that power gap so that people can actually speak. And I've seen it in teams that all three of us manage, and we consider ourselves inclusive leaders. And I know, but once you start talking and watching, and that's why it's so difficult, because like you said, leaders are trying to move fast. Their incentive priorities are different. It's a vicious circle because leaders are getting paid on success and performance. They would get better success and performance if they spent more time on culture, but it's not recognized because we haven't incentivized or built a performance system around culture the same way we have other parts of the business.
Let me flag that both for this conversation and then our team that's listening, right? Bob, what you said right at the tail end is that we don't have a way that we are structurally measuring the impact of culture. And that is really important as a point in the business context, because that's the type of, we're talking about the way the leader needs to communicate with their team and employees, and that's right. And it's the leadership responsibility to create the environment where healthy discourse exists and maintaining that. 100% agree. I also think it's important, it's yes and, that we have a better assessment of why culture impacts the bottom line to create more sustained buy-in from leaders based on the way that leaders think, the way that leaders are compensated. And so when we're talking to our emerging leaders, when we're promoting people, that part of the onboarding and mentoring process, we don't really spend as much time as we need to with leaders on why culture impacts everything they're trying to get done. And whether it's a 5-person company or 50,000 or 150,000 company, the leader sets the temperature of the organization based on what they respect, what they recognize, and what they tolerate in all those things. And so that's really important and good. Jackie, let me ask you this, as we're looking at this topic holistically, what are some of the things that you would recommend to a leader that is not currently having their behavior match their wants, to your point? Let's get practical. Let's get tactical a little bit. What are some of the things they can do to improve? What are some of the things they need to think about and unpack so that they can begin to get on that journey to drive that meaningful work? Because you can drive employee engagement through fear. You can be like, if you don't do this, you're going to get fired. Now, that doesn't create loyalty, but that'll get somebody to do what they need to do. You can have a fear-based leadership style or a numbers-based and get productivity. Meaningful work is about longevity. It is about creating a resilient employee base. It's about building trust and loyalty. So what are some of the steps that those leaders can think about to move more towards a leader that drives meaningful work?
So I think it's 3-part, with the third part being the most important or the most meaningful. There's prioritization. So a leader needs to understand the priorities and be able to disseminate work based on what is important. So to understand, and I actually had this conversation yesterday, it's really about, I as a leader understand the priorities of the organization, and I understand what my team needs to be doing. So I understand their priorities. And I'm not saying yes to every single thing out of laziness, fear, whatever the reason is, so that I'm able to manage my team appropriately, so that they're working in areas of strength with some of those things that we do because we get paid to do, not because we like it, but they're working in areas of strength, areas of excitement. The second thing is there's cohesiveness on the team. So that doesn't mean every person needs to be best friends with every person. It just means there's respect, there's understanding the value of what each person does, and there's good synergy in working together and doing your part. But the center of that is relationship with your team. You need to understand who that person is and what matters to them, where they are in their life, what things stress them outside of work, what things are exciting them outside of work, and how work plays into their full life. So it's not just the marketing guy, right? But what's his name? What's his family story? What's happening right now? So I have on my team one that just got married, one that's about to get married. So there's natural distraction. And that's okay. This is part of the life thing. So what I'm not doing is giving new work, hard work that takes a lot of new brain power in a specific period of time where they have outside distraction. And it's good distraction. Sometimes it's not good distraction. But this is amazing distraction, wonderful distraction. So then I need to manage time differently in this period than I will 2 months from now. And so understanding relationship, having relationship, and understanding who your team is, and being able to lead based on where they are from a professional standpoint, what they need professionally, what they need personally, is how you create meaningful work and partner with that employee to create meaningful work.
So let me start the process of why that perspective you outlined is valuable, because everything you said is true. So the problem in our audience is, and I'm thinking about the things you're saying from the leader standpoint, how do I have time to do that with all of the people I lead and interact with? How do I make that important with all of the other things that are on my plate? And so I want to create the environment. One, we're not advocating you're doing this all at once, that you're going through some 24-hour leadership metamorphosis. Second is the behavior you demonstrate will be duplicated. So what leaders don't recognize when we're talking about these things, they just think of, how am I going to do all this? But that's not how they do anything. We lead through the performance of people. And the higher your ability to scale your leadership through people is the success of your overall business. So then that means we have to change our expectations of the leaders we lead. And if everybody is 10, 15, 20, 30% better being an inclusive leader, now all of a sudden you start to have scale. And so Jackie, just to be clear, I wholesale agree with what you described. What I think is missing is making sure the leader understands how it can be implemented and why it matters. The other component to why it matters, if let's just say you're in a technology company, the difference between an average technologist and an excellent one is 50 to 100 times in productivity. When you're thinking about somebody that is a savant, right now, the two of you, when I think about all of the recognition I've gotten as a business leader in different things, each of you have had a hand in it period, bar none. The things I'm getting credit for writing, it's the two of y'all. I put my little spin on it. I don't care who hears it. You all are amazing, but you work very differently than I do. So in order for me to gain the best value from the two of you, I had to change and modify my communication style and standards a little bit. And then we met each other to get great work together. But it was because I value the contribution of your skill set such that I'm willing to augment by behavior to make you the most comfortable as possible while I'm asking you to do difficult things. I didn't change the difficulty level of my ask. And that's the other thing with leaders, and then I'll hush. Not talking about changing the standard. That makes it all weird. I am as economically focused as any human on this planet. When I talk to CEOs, like, I don't want to talk about that soft and fluffy stuff. It's like, no, you don't want to talk about winning. What I'm talking about is winning. And you win through highly talented, highly effective, highly productive people. And so I had to, over the years, rethink my communication style and standards. And here's the thing that is difficult, but it's worth it. You have to have a personalized leadership approach. I work with Bob different than I work with Jackie, then I work with Shelly, then I work with Kurt, then I work with Greg, who's the CEO of one of my companies. I work with Abba, a partner and the CEO of one of my companies, than I do with Brian. I do with Tony Pease, who's a CEO of his own firm now. Each one of these high octane leaders I just mentioned is a very, very different operating system. And to the degree I slowed down to learn that operating system, then I was able to maximize the value of those relationships. And so I just wanted to add that perspective as to the why it's super important, some of the points that you all are unpacking. Thank you for joining us on High Octane Leadership with Donald Thompson. Today's episode is a step in our collective journey towards leadership excellence. Remember, every story we share and every insight we gain is a piece in the puzzle of our leadership journey. For more insight and detail, hit the subscribe button so that we can stay connected. For deeper information and more episodes, go to donaldthompson.com. Continue to lead with vision and purpose, and until we meet again, embrace your role as a high-octane leader in the ever-evolving world of business.